My mother always used to say, Damon, never under any circumstances ever go full Badab. And then Games Workshop sent me this. So today I'm going full Badab. I couldn't help myself, guys. I took the 10 Reavers from this fantastic box set that Games Workshop sent me. Thank you, by the way. And I painted them up in 5 different schemes representing the rebels from the Badab War. The idea here is that I paint lots of different schemes in the same style and unify them with bases and details so that they look like a coherent mob of Red Corsair Raiders. Long story short, the Badab War was started when Huron and his Astral Claws over in the Maelstrom decided that they no longer wanted to pay taxes to the wider Imperium. So on that note, let's start with 40k's tax dodgers themselves, the Astral Claws. With the 2 Astral Claws, I primed them with a Chaos Black spray all over and then hit them up with a sponge from the top with Heavy Metal by Army Painter. What better way to represent the Astral Claws than by giving the sergeant in this Raider squad a set of his own claws. These were taken from the Chaos Raptor set from Kill Team and the only real kit bash that I did here. I then went in with a medium sort of dry brush with a very bright Stormhost silver. This was to pick out any of the metallic armor details on the highest point of the model before we go into our weathering stage later on. The Astral Claws are known for having a dirty silver armor with elements of blue and gold. And I decided rather than to mask off the pauldrons, I would actually paint these in a metallic blue. I then doused the entire miniature in some Nuln oil. You could use 2 heavy coats here, but we're going to do lots and lots of weathering later on. This is just to dull down and blend the transition between the darker metal and the lighter silver. I have noticed that the formula for Nuln oil has changed quite substantially and it's no longer as good as it used to be at dyeing and tinting the surface underneath, which is good in some ways, but it does leave a slightly greyer finish than it did before. When it came to the pauldrons and knee pads, I kept that metallic underneath and I doused them in some Talassar blue Citadel contrast paint. This is a fantastic vibrant blue that I think really does lean into the Astral Claws aesthetic very well. Next up is Retributor armor on the pauldron edges and rims, as well as any other key details that I find around the model. You have to excuse the rather old and dirty pot here. I don't use this color too often, but I feel it really works bringing a warm gold into the mix here. I've got to say, guys, this kit is absolutely magnificent. It is one of the best 40k kits I have ever got my hands on. It's nice and simple. There's loads of lovely different helmet and head options. In this case, I've gone for Mark 6 Corvus helmets because I just love the aesthetic of those. They are pure old school nostalgia for me, Rogue Trader era, as well as some Mark 7 helms as well. But you'll notice on these models, we've got some really cool details. The backpacks going from being quite chaotic to being Mark 3s, Mark 2s, etc., as well as different pauldrons, different knee pads, and elements of all sorts of different armor marks throughout the years of Warhammer 40,000. Leaving the Astral Claw there for a minute, we then move on to our Mantis Warriors. These guys are a White Scar successor, and they have been hugely disgraced since their siding with Huron in the Badab War. These guys are known for their stealth and ambush and guerrilla war tactics in the jungle world that they come from. And this is a scheme that I've always wanted to paint but just never had the opportunity. The 2 most sneaky models that I went for here had to be my Mantis Warriors. And I wanted to work from a dirty, warm brown up to the vibrant green that you tend to see with Mantis Warriors, using contrast Gore-Grunter fur on the entire miniature first. Starting from a Wraithbone Zenithal Prime. Gore-Grunter fur is a really nice, warm, chocolatey sort of brown here. And one thing I did notice when I was applying this was it was quite bright for what I wanted to do. Perhaps I could have used a darker brown, but actually, in the end, this works out really well. Mantis Warriors are pretty badass, I'll admit. Even though they do have a very vibrant scheme, I'm going to dull things down and make it very grimdark by the end of this video. Once the brown has dried on the armor, we're then going to take our sponge again, damp it slightly, and go with some Tainted Garden by Army Painter, again in a sponging motion, quite lightly over the top of the armor of this miniature. Here's where we start building up that lovely rich green. Back to my thoughts around the brown here. Once the green is applied, you'll notice that the brown in the recesses isn't quite as dark as what you would normally like, so I would suggest starting with a darker brown. However, I can cover my own arse by using lots and lots of weathering later on. I'm going to turn things up to 11 now with some moot green, and I'm going to get one of my stippling brushes. This is an old brush that I've cut the top off for a square, rough finish, and I'm going to start stippling moot green into the top of this miniature, starting with a 50-50 mixture with the Tainted Garden that we used earlier, moving all the way up to the moot green that you see here. This is an acidic apple green color, and it is a fantastic highlight for armor like this. Stippling's one of those things that starts out looking kind of bad, and then when you finally get to where you want to go with it, it starts clicking and coming together really well. But those volumetric highlights and contrasts in color is what we're looking for here. Specifically with a chapter that's from a jungle world, I wanted to go for a real camo feel. And the other thing that stippling does is it gives more texture to the model as well, making it have a different sort of aesthetic, a slightly chalky, textured look, which I really want in this case. Again, these miniatures are just fantastic. Look at the pose on this one. It's so dynamic. I love the helmet. I love everything about it. They could be bad guys. They could be good guys. In this case, they are tax dodgers. Now, the pauldrons and mouth grill on Mantis Warriors are always a bright, vivid yellow as well. So we went in here with a small brush and we sort of marked out the basics of both pauldrons and the sort of face grill on this Mark 8, I think it is, or Mark 7 helm. Correct me if I'm wrong there. Having these helmets in this sort of scale is just so awesome, by the way. I think Games Workshop moving into Primaris, you know, some really love the Primaris helmets. I like them too, but I will say these are just so much more classic for me, particularly the Mark 6. I just absolutely love them in this case. And of course, normally we only get them in Horus Heresy, so it's lovely to be able to use these helmets on a slightly bigger scale in the 40k universe. Back to our stippling brush, we're going to get Flash Gitz Yellow, which is a very, very bright yellow, over the top of this slightly darker yellow here, and start stippling in the same way we did with the green. We'll leave our Mantis Warrior there for now and move on to our next Badab Rebel chapter. This is going to be the Executioners, founded by Fafnir Ran of the Imperial Fists. These are the Sons of Dawn, and they also don't like paying taxes. They are an awesome looking chapter and another one that I've always wanted to paint up for you. So in exactly the same way we started with our Astral Claw, a black primer, we're going to go over with a sponge and some heavy metal as well. The Executioners are absolutely badass, and they've got a really cool scheme as well. They've got this kind of bluish hue to their armor, so we're going to talk about that in a bit. But first, we're going to do exactly the same as we did before and go in with some very, very bright Unifying steel with another dry brush here. So I've seen Executioners done in a couple of different ways. In the artwork and other people that have painted them in the community, quite often they have a slight bluish grey hue to the metal armor that they have. So I decided here to mix 50-50, contrast Gryph-Charger Grey as well as Ultramarines Blue, which isn't as bright as the Talassar Blue we used on the Astral Claw. And again, I don't want these guys to look too similar. I don't want the Executioners and Astral Claws to sit together and look too close. So we're going to go with a cold sort of bluish grey wash over the armor to give that sort of bluish look. Immediately, as soon as I start applying this, I realize that this is exactly the kind of color that I want to go for, because then we're going to complement it with some nice warm gold and red details. So in the same style as the Astral Claw, we're going to use Emperor Gold on the pauldrons and knee pads and any other details, maybe the backpacks that we see here as well. And for now, that's where we're going to leave our Executioners onto the next chapter, the Lamenters. Couple of things to talk about here. The Lamenters are a Blood Angel's successor, and they were nearly all completely wiped out at the Badab War by my favourite chapter, the Minotaurs. The Minotaurs absolutely ragdolled this chapter into oblivion, and they've been crying about it ever since. But I will say, the Lamenters have so much old school retro appeal, and a lot of people online really, really love the Lamenters. They've just got such an iconic scheme, and I've never really painted a yellow Space Marine. I know a lot of people have asked me for Imperial Fists, etc., but let's start with Lamenters because they are so old school. Now, I felt a bit uncomfortable doing this, but I've seen people do it, so I figured it will probably work. We're starting with a white base coat on this, or Wraithbone should I say, and I'm going to go over it with Citadel Contrast Luxian Purple. Not to be confused with Chris Luxon, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. This is Luxian, not Luxon. With the Chris Luxon Purple now dry, we're going to mask off the shoulder pad for later, because I'm going to do something that I've never ever attempted before, which is some check patterns on the shoulder pad. We'll see how it goes. I've never done any freehand before, so this will be a first. I've masked it off with some blue tack, and now we're going to do a overall sponge from the top again, much like we did with the others, with some heavy warm grey. This is an awesome colour. It is a warmish pinky grey that's very, very pale, but it just has a really, really nice look to it. I can see already that the transition between the purple and the light warm grey, or the heavy warm grey should I say, is starting to look pretty good now. But how, you ask, is this going to be yellow in the end? Now, it's obvious I don't do a huge amount of dry brushing normally, because I went in with a dry brush here with white, and my god is it chalky and awful. I definitely need some new brushes, but honestly I'm going to go for texture here, and I want to be quite heavy-handed, so even though it looks absolutely terrible and it looks like I don't know what I'm doing, which in some ways is usually the truth, however, this does end up looking pretty good, so bear with me here, guys. Okay, so here comes the moment of truth. I've never tried this before. We've used a purple under color, we've built it up to white through a sort of warm grey pinkish, and now we're going to throw Citadel Contrast Imperial Fists all over the armor of the Lamenter here. Wow, as soon as I apply this, I can see the modulation and the depth and richness that this yellow is bringing, just with that purple as a sort of shade going on in the recesses. It's looking fantastic already, and we're going to move on to our next chapter here. We'll be back with all of these soon. The next one is the Charnel Guard. Now, I can hear you lore masters out there saying, Damon, the Charnel Guard weren't actually part of Badab War, and they weren't. You are quite right, but in my head canon, some of them stayed behind. Now, they were originally a chapter that was part of the Maelstrom Warders, along with the Lamenters and the Mantis Warriors, etc. They then went off on their own little crusade. No idea what happened to them, but they're just a really awesome chapter, and they're also the same sort of color scheme as the Red Corsairs, so I threw them into the mix here. I'm sure you'll forgive me. In my head canon, a few stayed behind and were corrupted by Luft's Huron. So these are a couple of representatives from the Charnel Guard, another Blood Angel's successor. This is going to be the most simple one of them all. I'm starting out with Abaddon Black Spray, or should I say Chaos Black Spray, I'm not sure which one it is. And I'm going to go in with a sponge and highlight the entire miniature with the sponge with Corvus Black. This is my favorite highlight and thing to do with black. If you haven't seen my Overthinking Black video, go check it out, because I use this a lot. And a lot of people actually ask me for my recipes for black armor, and honestly, less is more. The more simple you go, the more you frame your black, the better it looks. It's not about doing anything to the black necessarily, it's more about framing it, weathering it, and creating a really, really nice, basic looking solid black. These guys have a burgundy reddish sort of color to their pauldrons and stuff, so I'm going to go in here with some blanched berry, which is quite a purpley red, mixed in with some fiery vermilion. Depends on how much you want to go into the red scheme here, but I want to go with more of a sort of burgundy here, so I'm using more of the blanched berry. And again, I'm going to be stippling this on and building the color up, starting from pure blanched berry up to the vermilion red that you just saw me show off. The Charnel Guard are one of those chapters that you don't see too often, so again I thought it would be good to highlight them here. They are a Blood Angel successor and Sons of Sanguinius, the best of all Primarchs, so I had to throw them in here. Two of the Blood Angel successors in these guys and the Lamenters, and the most simple of all the colour schemes here as well, and honestly one of the most effective by the end too. With all of the basic armor done at this point, we're then going to move on to the tabards, and this is where I start to unify the squad as a whole. I want this squad to look like a unit of guerrilla space marines that has been thrown together, but they're in the same environment. So not only are we going to have the same bases for these guys, but I also want the sort of some of the trappings on them to be the same. The gun casings are going to be the same, the tabards are going to be the same, and in this case I'm going to go in with some Wraithbone and just sort of block out all of the fabrics and tabards on most of these guys. Once I've blocked in all the tabards, I'm then going to hit all of them with the Seraphim Sepia shade from Citadel as well. This is one of my favourite shades. It's quite similar to Skeleton Horde, however it is not a contrast paint, it is more of a shade, so it settles in the recesses better and doesn't stain the sort of colour underneath too much. But it ends up looking like a sort of tea stain that you've got on here. Next up, we're going to hit all of the metals again. So this is the barrels of the gun, the bionic leg in this instant here as well, and any weapons and gear that you want, grenades with heavy metal as well. For the gun casings and weapon casings here, I'm going to go in with just neat Corvus black over everything. This is the lighter black that we used as a highlight earlier on our charnel guard. On all the leather areas, the belt and any pouches, we're just going to hit them up with a really basic dark brown as well. I think in this case we've got dryad bark. Once we've done all the heavy metal, we'll then coat them all with Rattling Grime. Rattling Grime is a Citadel contrast paint and it's one of my absolute favorites. You know, I talk about it a lot in my videos. Rattling Grime is a greenish brown sort of contrast color that works really well on metals to make it look a bit worn and weathered. For any of the rubber details, the connectors between the different armor parts and any pipes and things like that that we see on the model, we're going to use Citadel Contrast Black Templar. I feel this is a really good one just for naturally sort of flowing into the recesses of the sort of armpits and elbows and things like that as well. This is a fantastic color for that, and that's all you really need to do with those pieces. Any of the gold details that we added to the miniature, we're now going to highlight up a little bit with some Psychorax bronze as a sort of edge highlight here. It's pretty much one of the only edge highlights I actually do in this whole video. Once we've done that highlight, we're then going to go in with some Voodoo shade. This is a lovely color as well, and it's slightly different to the Rattling Grime and the Seraphim Sepia that we used as well. It's a bit warmer. It's more of a sort of fleshy color, I suppose, than say Rattling Grime, and it just adds some variation to the mix. And this is going to go all over the gold details on our model. All right, folks, back to our Lamenters, and this is the bit that I've been dreading. If I'm honest, I told myself I would do it, so here I am doing it. Now, I masked off the pauldrons, the right-hand pauldron on both of the Lamenters. Luckily, I'm not doing an entire squad of 10 of these guys, just 2, and then I stole one of my son's pencils from his pencil case as well. He did say I could use it, but what I did notice as soon as I started doing this is that the pauldron itself has little rivets on it, and those rivets can be used here to map out where we want our squares and lines to be, which is quite a clever way of doing it. I will admit this is quite a clever way of utilizing the shapes on the miniature. So by using the centermost rivet on the bottom and top of this pauldron, I'm drawing as straight a line as I can with the pencil, just very, very lightly down the miniature from top to bottom and from bottom to top. Once we've got our central line, I will then do 2 other lines connecting the other rivets, but a little bit more on a curve this time, because this is a curved surface. Freehanding on a curved surface is an absolute nightmare. Well, I wouldn't really know because I've never really attempted it, and anytime I may have attempted it, I've probably given up straight away. So as you can see here, the pencil is just really good for edging out those sort of lines that I want to know and plan where my squares are going to go. Now, I'm not going to go full tilt on this and create the Lamenter logo as well, because these guys are now working for the Red Corsairs, and the way that I figure it in my head canon is that these guys were made to or encouraged to wear their old armor as a sort of insult to the Imperium. So we've got this squad of veteran guerrilla soldiers, or Astartes should I say, working for Huron, and they're wearing the original trappings that they had as a real final insult to the Imperium. The checks are just so iconic from Rogue Trader era Lamenters, but not only Lamenters, of course, Orcs as well. Orcs use lots and lots of checks too, and it's something that I've always shied away from, if I'm honest. It just looks too difficult, but actually, now I've started with the pencil here, I can see that I can get fairly neat lines really, and that things actually spacing wise are not too bad. I could go with smaller checks here, but I'm just not confident that I can paint in smaller checks. So if you're going to do this, just go with what you're comfortable with. Don't push yourself too far, because it will be really, really difficult to do smaller squares. Okay, so once we've mapped out the grid system on the pauldrons of both of these Lamenters, we can then go in with some Abaddon Black, or even Corvus Black if you like, and start painting in some of the alternate squares. Now, it's really important that you concentrate here and don't sort of, make an obvious mess. You can tidy up if you like afterwards, but B, obviously make sure that your squares are in the right places. You don't put a black next to a black, for example. It's got to be all diagonals. You know what I mean when you see checkers, like a chessboard. I'm going to start with one of the bigger squares in the middle and then sort of go out from there, because I feel there are smaller squares and sort of half squares in here as well that will be a bit more tricky. I tend to find it helps when I hold my breath when I do this, if I need a steady hand, but also moving the miniature in your hand and dragging the brush from top to bottom along the brush bristles is definitely the way to go. Don't try and sort of stipple with this, because it will just make a real blotchy looking sort of texture that you don't want on a smooth surface. So with the black done on both of the Lamenter pauldrons, we can then move on to some white just to tidy up the edges of the black and go over any of those pencil lines that are still shining through. I'm not going to go crazy here, but I'm using a bit of white scar just to sort of highlight the edge of each of the white boxes, as well as sort of just tidying up the pencil marks that we left from earlier. Pretty good. I'm pretty happy with my first attempt at checks. It's not perfect, but it's decent, and I think honestly once the weathering is over it and once I've done the rim of the pauldron as well in Emperor Gold, this thing is going to really pop and look lovely and classic and old school in the Lamenters vibe. So again, being really careful here, we're just painting in the rims of this pauldron, making sure not to spill any of this Emperor Gold onto the actual checkerboard that we've got here. Just be really careful and work your way around slowly and methodically. Okay, so the next bit I didn't actually record, unfortunately, but it was a long-winded process, and this was me going through the Red Corsair transfer sheet that's in the box and applying decals to all of these miniatures. Now, I decided not to use any actual Red Corsair fists at all, and any of the pauldrons in the box either. What I did want to use, though, is just some of the sort of like glyphs and skulls that you get in this transfer kit, which is really good, by the way. It's got some cool stuff on it, some really interesting looking symbols, and I wanted to get contrast in here. We've got some blacks, some whites, some reds, and some gold decals on this set, which is brilliant. Lots and lots of color in here, and as you can see, I've done my decals with micro set and micro sol. The next step though is to go into the weathering, but as you can see, things are looking pretty boss at this stage. Now you'll notice that all of these miniatures are quite shiny. That's because I also sprayed them with a sort of lacquer varnish, a high coat gloss varnish. It is a very cheap gloss varnish that you can get from any art shop. Doesn't really matter what you need, because we're going to go over this now with some enamel wash to again further unify everything in the mix here and make the squad have a bit more cohesion in its environment and vibe. So the enamel wash that I'll be using here today is Goon's Grime by Villainy Inks. This is a fantastic product. It's a bit like Streaking Grime, but it's not. It doesn't dye the underneath quite so much, and it's also a lot more subtle, I'd say, than say Streaking Grime. It's thinner, it's more aqueous, and it runs into the recesses a little bit better than say a Streaking Grime as well. This one you can actually leave to cure for quite a while before you start removing it with some white spirit, and that's what I've done here. I'm going through the entire squad with a big dirty brush, and I'm just sort of stippling and trying to get the Goon's Grime into all of the recesses of these miniatures. It's really important, by the way, if you buy a bottle of enamel wash like this, that you give it a really good shake before you use it. Extra shakes before you use it, because this stuff does separate out a little bit if you leave it in a box for too long or on the shelf, say. About 20 minutes has gone by since I applied all of the Goon's Grime. I could wait a bit longer and make this cure a bit longer before I go in with some odorless mineral spirits, but I'm not going to. I'm impatient, so I'm going to go in with a Q-tip and now roll the Q-tip around the miniature and get rid of the uppermost surface sort of residue of the Goon's Grime. Now you can use a sponge here or even just your finger, but I would say that with cotton buds you get a bit more accuracy. The only caveat with cotton buds is they do leave behind a little bit of fluff that you have to take off with tweezers a bit later on as well. Sometimes you don't notice it and it ends up in photos or something as well, which is the bane of my life. It's really important here, even though we did apply the gloss varnish beforehand, that we don't press too much, we don't rub too hard, because that is where you will get problems and paint will start to get removed from this just by the way that mineral spirits are quite harsh and abrasive. Just be really soft and roll the cotton bud around the miniature. With our Goon's Grime applied and taken off in the reductive technique, I'm now going to add an extra step because I feel like things could slightly be improved in terms of the overall weathering here. I also feel like some more color could be added into the mix, again, for coherency reasons as well. So what I've done here on the paper towel is I've got a burnt umber oil paint as well as a bright vivid orange as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to stipple this directly onto the miniature, and then we're going to use odorless mineral spirits to move it around and create some modulation and variation in tones and colors in the shadows and on the surfaces of the armor. As you can see, I'm adding little dots all over the miniature, some brown, some orange, and I'm being as random as I possibly can here. I don't want any sort of regulation to this. It needs to be random to feel organic. Once I've placed enough of these, I then go in with another stippling brush and we just stipple odorless mineral spirits onto the oils and move them around and play around with them to our heart's content. Now you can really spend a lot of time on this process, or you can just do it fairly swiftly like I am. But you know, think about gravity, think about the way that rain, marks, watermarks, things like that, oil drips down on a surface from top to bottom. Drag the oil downwards and you will end up with, you know, realistic looking weathering and streaks on your miniatures. So I did the oil weathering on the two lighter miniatures, or the two lighter schemes should I say, the Lamenters and the Mantis Warriors. However, on the other three, the Charnel Guard, the Astral Claws and the Executioners, I'm actually going to do it with pigments instead. So this is a slightly different process, and again, you will have seen if you watched my Overthinking Black video, I did paint an entire Space Marine using only pigments, by the way, and I'm using some of those processes here. I'm only going to use one pigment, and this is a sort of dark sienna, like a burnt sienna pigment. I'm going to just splotch this again fairly randomly onto the miniature and then follow it up with some more odorless mineral spirits, which allows that pigment to run into the recesses, and when it dries it adds some really nice character, especially to dark armor and blacks in this instance. Once we've done our weathering, I'm going to go in with a spot highlight. This is just a very, very minute little detail that you could leave out. In this case, I'm going back to our Runefang steel and I'm just doing tiny little pinpricks of very, very, very bright silver just to break up some of those darker areas. I might pick a rivet here or there. I might just do a little scratch or a little highlight somewhere just on the higher points and the sticky outy edges of our miniatures, just to break things up and to make everything look just really, really awesome, basically. And there we have it, a squad of 10 Red Corsairs Raiders done in the Badab badass schemes that I chose to do here for you today. I really hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to do a little slideshow of all of them. By the way, I didn't show the basing as well on this, and I do apologize for that, but I have got other tutorials that use the same basing formulas for these as well. Lots of contrast, very, very easy to achieve, so go and check those out. But I really, really, really enjoyed making this video, and I love these miniatures as well. They were an absolute joy to paint. I really hope you like these. I'd love to know which is your favorite down in the comments below. Are you a Lamenters guy? Are you a Charnel Guard guy? Which do you think actually turned out looking best as well? Because I think I know which my favorite is, but I'm going to save that for myself. Anyway, I will be back real soon. I'll let you have a look at all of the miniatures in this Guerrilla Badab Badass squad. Over and out.